I'm a little bit sick of my clay. I've been using the same clay for, I don't know, 5 years, maybe more. And it's beautiful, it works really well. I understand what it's gonna do when I put it in the kiln, but I've just seen it a lot, and I have ideas for different things that I want to make that, you know, look a little bit different. They just don't have the speckle, they're a little bit more chill, a little bit more plain, different colors a little bit in my head. So I just want to do some experiments. A while ago, maybe a year ago, I bought some clay to test with from a place called Hotclay. Ironically, the clay that I buy currently is from a place called Potclays, so it's nice to just change one letter and get an entirely different result. Anyway, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different clays that I want to test. We're going to have a nice time making some test pieces with them today. Each little pack of clay is 1 kilogram, so I'm going to make a few little test tiles, and I'm going to make a small tumbler, and I might make a small bowl as well. I also want to check shrinkage, so I'm going to make a small shrinkage ruler for each piece. Before I get started preparing, I just need to cover this. It's a new tattoo. I got it 2 days ago, and I really don't want to get any like clay dust on it because I just feel like that'll be rank. So I'm gonna wrap that up in some cling film. I really feel like a ceramic studio couldn't be a worse place to be when you've got a new tattoo. And I also want to talk to you about my beautiful nails that my niece did for me. She's 7, real talented, her name's Florence. The nail polish is kind of coming off a little bit, it looks a little bit janky, but I really like the color, so I've kept it on. Thank you, Florence, for the manicure, I love it. Right on! This is my trusty studio notebook, I guess. It's got lots of glaze test recipes in here and notes, and if I was testing a piece for a commission, then I would write all the measurements and things down here. So it's a perfect little book for that. And what we can see here is the labels have been damaged when I was rehydrating the clay. This is disgusting, so we want to get rid of that. We don't want that in the studio. So I'm going to label these and I'm going to write them down in the book. Number 1 is going to be this studio throwing clay. I'll write that in my book as well. Test number 2 is this rotten mess. School and studio all purpose, no grog. So this is going to be 2. School and studio all purpose with grog. 1 with grog will be 3. Toasted clay, that's fun, that will be 4. And then I've got a hand building crank clay, which are always quite interesting. I will try and throw with it, but we'll see what happens. All of these can be fired to 1260 degrees Celsius, which is where I go. What I'm going to test them all on is the feel when throwing them, what it kind of feels like under my hands, how it behaves as well, what it looks like when it's fired, of course, it's a huge thing. I want to know how it reacts with my kind of base glazes. I want to know if there's any funny things like crazing or cracking or warping, anything like that that essentially indicates it's going to be a nightmare to work with, like porcelain. I don't really like working with porcelain because it's just too like finicky, you know? It doesn't, I mean, I like a more kind of rustic look anyway, but porcelain is just more of a pain to work with, so I don't like it. And I don't want my clay that I work with every day to be a pain in the ass. So I'm gonna write all of that down. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna get started on preparing all of these clays. So that would be for the cup and the bowl, maybe 500 grams to make some test tiles. And then I am going to make a shrinkage tile for each one. To do this, you just need a tiny bit of clay, and you're going to roll it out into a little log. So you roll out a little flat rectangle, and I'm just going to cut it into a strip. And then you're going to take a ruler, this is a 30 centimeter ruler, and I'm going to measure 10 centimeters, and I'm going to mark each centimeter and half centimeter. And then when it shrinks, I will know that if it goes down to 9 centimeters, that it's 10% shrinkage rate. I've labeled it on the back with clay 1, and this is what it looks like. It doesn't have to be too neat, it doesn't have to be too wild, it's just something that shows what 10 centimeters looks like when it is wet before it has been fired. So this I'm just gonna now leave, and I'm gonna add all the other rulers to this bat, and it will just dry on the shelf. So for each clay, I am going to ball up two 250 gram balls of clay, and then the remainder is going to be to make some test tiles. And I have made my ruler already, so I can use all of the clay up now. So I have my 3 bats prepared as well, so I'm just going to put this clay number 1 aside while I prepare the rest of the clays. Here we go, they are all wedged up and ready to throw. These are all the rulers together, so they actually look quite beautiful like this, and we can see the different colors in the clay. This one I'm most intrigued about. It's like a, obviously it's very red. It looks like terracotta to me. It's the one that's called toasted, so I'm really excited to see what that looks like. This one I think might be quite a light color, kind of a, maybe similar to what I'm using now, or maybe even white. These two I think will look exactly the same, but this one just has some grog in it. And this one is the hand building clay. So I quickly made a little coil pot just to see kind of how it feels. It's really, really groggy. There's loads of sand in it, so I assume it won't shrink loads. And I'm very interested to see how it feels when I throw with it. Okay, let's get started with clay ball number 1. It's gonna be a little tumbler. First impressions, clay is really nice and soft, far softer than the groggy stoneware that I usually use. Oh, it feels beautiful actually under my hands. There's definitely a warmth to this clay that I guess will come out as like a toasted color, or like a warm, maybe like a yellowy kind of white color. Usually I have a mirror just in front of me when I'm throwing. I don't have it there right now because I want to get the whole shot in. But it's definitely like quite a weird feeling when you're so used to a certain tool like a mirror to not have it. That's pot number 1. So first impression of this first clay, it's really smooth. There's very little grog to it at all. Honestly, it felt great throwing with that. Pot number 2, this clay was a lot wetter when it came out of the bag. I had to wedge it on a plaster bat just to get it to be a little bit more consistent. This clay immediately kind of feels very similar to the first clay. It's really smooth. I think probably this is just what all clay feels like when there's not much grog or no grog in it. But it kind of feels like to me like throwing with butter, because I'm so used to throwing with such a sandy clay. Really easy to center. That is beautiful to throw with. Really, really nice. The third clay, which I think will be a very similar feeling to the second clay. This one is the same clay but with grog, so I'm not bothering to wash my hands in between. This one was much harder out of the bag, so I had to spray it with some water while I was wedging it and preparing it. So it might, I mean, it's naturally just going to feel a little bit different in my hands because it's harder. I can't judge it on that, you know. But this one surprisingly feels exactly the same despite having grog in it. But I guess it will just shrink less, and maybe there'll be like a speckle to it. I mean, so they all feel really nice and plasticky under my fingers. Despite this one being harder, it's not felt sandy at all. And I'm so used to a groggy clay, so it's interesting that the grog is not that perceivable. Maybe it's a really small amount, but it just makes it a little bit better for hand building than it would the one without grog. I don't know if I would, at this point, prefer one over the other. They feel exactly the same. And honestly, I think they look exactly the same. Weird. I'm guessing that we'll see a difference when it's fired. Okay, now we're moving on to that beautiful red clay, so we definitely need to get rid of some of this lighter clay. Sometimes a really red looking clay can actually fire out heaps when it's in the kiln, and I really hope that this is actually like a red clay. This clay feels exactly the same as well. They clearly make a very consistent clay. Look at that. It's so beautiful. And that is pot number 4. Yeah, that was a nice clay again to throw. Actually, my hands feel a bit more groggy now. There must be some sand in that one that I didn't notice in the other ones, which is interesting. And now on to the last one, which is definitely gonna feel very sandy because it is a crank clay. And crank is like a hand building clay or just like a really typically cheaper, very robust kind of clay, there's heaps of sand and grog in it, which makes it quite strong and a little bit less susceptible to shrinkage and to warping and cracking. The sand just kind of strengthens the clay. So if you think about porcelain, which is like a really fine clay, and it's like effectively pure kaolin, which is like clay, there's no like impurities in it. So it's really beautiful. It's that bright white color, but there's nothing in it to strengthen it. So if you do a bad job at throwing it, then it's gonna be a little bit more fussy. Whereas if you are using a stoneware, there tends to be lots of sand in it, and that makes it nice and robust. So it's slightly easier to throw with. Oh yeah. There's some bits in this clay, that's for sure. I can feel it immediately. It's sharp. And it just kind of feels less spongy under my fingers. Not a bad thing, just, you know, it's what I feel. I wonder if you can hear that. That's the sand in the clay against the wood. Very rough. Depending on what color this fires to, it's actually quite beautiful. Like if it fires to this gray color, I'd be quite happy. I often kind of look at concrete and think, I wish I could throw with concrete. And I have thrown with gray clays before and kind of that have a texture of concrete, or, you know, they kind of look like concrete when they're finished. But I really didn't like working with it. And this is kind of reminding me of that. I don't love the feeling, but if it's a really cool clay afterwards, then maybe I don't have to like the feeling. Maybe it's about the finished product. I do feel like this clay would really behave itself. If you're throwing like a big vase or something, it's gonna actually just do what you say instead of doing its own thing. There's this big skirt under here because it was too sharp under my hands, so I didn't want to like press down into the back. It was too sore. Okay, that's the last one. As you can see, there's a little bit more texture on this piece, but I think that when we come to trim it, that's when all of the texture really will come out and we'll be able to see the true nature of that grog. And here they all are lined up together. So that's the first one, lightest of them all. And then these two, which are the same clay, but the one on the left, this one here, has grog, this one doesn't. This is the toasted, and then this is the groggy crank. I'm now going to finish throwing all of these other pieces, so the bowls and the little test tiles, and I'll see you again when it's time to trim them all in the morning. Hi, it's the next day and my pieces are pretty much leather hard, I think. Time to turn these into test tiles. I am going to do this from lightest clay all the way to the reddest clay. This is super stuck. The way that I do this is I just chop it. I just chop it up. So I'm gonna vaguely mark like halfway and then halfway between those 2 points and then between those two. So 1, 2, 3, and it just goes round there. And that is gonna mean that I get 8 little test tiles, which is perfect. So each of these will get labelled with clay 1 on them. This is what they look like. So I'm going to do this with all of the rest of the test tiles as well. Okay, trimming for cup number 1. Let's go. This is the finished first tumbler. a little bit of the sand has come through when I've trimmed it. That is real normal. That just happens when you put a sponge to the clay. It just brings some of that grit up. Yeah, that was nice to trim with, nice to throw with, happy with it. Now I think it will all depend on how it looks when it comes out of the kiln. Clay number 2, trimming. To be honest, clay 2 felt exactly the same as clay number 1. I don't think I'm gonna learn that much from trimming these clays. Apart from that, clay number 5 is just gonna feel very gritty. I'm just gonna trim them all and I'll come back in a second once they're done. I just wanted to show you these ones, the rulers. They have dried to bone dry and the colour has changed heaps, and I think that is really interesting and does give an indication of what their colours are going to be when they're finished. The clays have shrunk at different rates before they've been fired, so this is greenware still. Excuse my nails. Yeesh. Clay 1, clay 5 and clay 3 have shrunk about 5%, so it's down to about 9.5 centimeters, so we can see that's 5% already. And clay 4 and clay 2 have shrunk nearly the full 10%, which is very interesting. That's a whole centimeter. So I am very interested to see how much these shrink entirely. Hello, it's now glaze day. All of my pieces have come out of the kiln and they've been bisque fired, and they all look way more orange than I was expecting, which is interesting. So these are the clays, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, and then this is my normal clay. This one is usually way whiter. I wish the focus would go on the glaze tile instead of me. Just have to hide. I'm actually surprised at this. I am really looking forward to seeing what these look like up at their top temperature and with some glaze on. I think it'll be very interesting. So each cup I'm gonna glaze with a clear glaze, inside and outside. So I just want it fully covered in a transparent glaze. Then the bowl, I'm going to glaze white on the inside only, so that we can have a surface at least without any glaze, so we just can see like what it looks like. And then each of these test tiles, I have 8 each, and I'm gonna do 1 in white and 1 in clear. A chalk glaze, a honey glaze, a blue glaze, a pink glaze, a green glaze, and then one of the tiles is just gonna have decorations applied to it. So I've got some pencil, I've got some wax resist, and I've got a cobalt oxide, which will go blue. And so we'll try those 3 underneath just a transparent glaze as well. I am glazing other stuff as well at the same time, so everything is just gonna kind of be glazed and wiped and put in the kiln. And we'll find out in 2 days. I'm so excited. Obviously this video is like compact and edited down, but for me, this has been a few weeks and I'm really, really excited. So this is my rusty clay ruler. We can see that they've all shrunk at least 5%, and I think they will probably shrink a lot more in the glaze firing as well. Number 1 looks to be the least shrunk. It's a little bit warped. I think it's looking like it's maybe shrunk 4% so far, but everything else a little bit more. This one has shrunk a lot, and this one as well. Yeah, very interesting. I'm wearing slightly nicer clothes than I would like to for glaze day, so I'm just gonna quickly get changed into my glaze wear. We love a transition. We're gonna start with the white glaze. The white glaze is my most used glaze. I think this and like whatever thing I'm feeling in the moment, like a honey I'm obviously really into at the moment, but white is just like the standard glaze that I've used for a long time because it always looks nice, you know? Each glaze will get mixed up for a good few minutes, and then the test tiles will go in. Here we go. First one. So I'm going to fill them up, leave them for 3 seconds or so. That might have been more. Tip it out. And I always like to do the little foot ring as well. This is a cute little touch. Clay 1. Clay 1 looks like there's some like sand in it. I don't know if you can see that on the camera. It's really subtle, but there is like a little bit of texture to it. I'm very interested to see if that like blooms into something visible, you know what I mean? I'm wondering if that is gonna be like my clay that I currently use. This is covered in clay, but you can see these dots that comes from the clay. That's grog in the clay. So it will be interesting to see if that like manifests into something, hello sun, visible, or if it's just literally some texture. Clay 2. Clay 3's done. I love this red clay. I hope it stays red. I really like terracotta clay, but because I work with functional where I prefer to fire higher than terracotta can usually go. So I'm always kind of on the lookout for a like affordable red stoneware. Problem is with using red clays is that it's a real mess and it truly looks like a murder scene after you've been throwing, so. I really have to be committed to a clay to want to use it. That was clay number 4, the red one. And now the groggy clay 5. So much texture to this. I assume I'm not really going to like using this on the wheel. If it comes out and it's really beautiful looking after it's been glazed, then maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'll change my mind, but usually something this textured is actually kind of annoying to work with. You get things like pinholes and you get, it's like kind of hard to glaze and it just hurts your hands, so prefer to not use it for functional stuff if I can. For test tiles, the way that I test them is I do an initial dip like this for 3 seconds, let it drip off and let it dry. That is no longer shiny, so I'm going to dip it in again. And then I do just one corner. So I dip it like that into the glaze. And another 3 seconds and out. The reason I do that is because I like to see what it looks like when it's thicker and what it looks like where it's thinner. And you get to see a variation on a single test tile. I'm going to do that same thing with all of the test tiles in the white and all of the other colors as well. These will all just get a sponge down on these rims so that it's a clear rim the whole way around. And I'll check the bottom of each test tile to make sure there's no glaze on the bottom, and then I will go on to the next colour. I've finished my glazing for the day. We've got all the glaze tests, we've got the tumbler tests, and we've got the bowl tests here. Time to load up the kiln so that we can get it on and firing, and we can have a look at how it goes in a couple of days. Guys, I've just arrived. It's kiln unload day. It's results day. I'm so excited, very apprehensive. It's been a long time coming. You know, my tattoo's healed. My hair's a different color. We're on a different wavelength now compared to where we were earlier in the series. So let's open her up. Kiln's 120 degrees, slightly hotter than I would like to open it. Usually I'd prefer under 100, but it's fine. That's Celsius, by the way, for you American folk. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit. It's 120 degrees in there, and it's also going to be a really hot day today, so t-shirts on. Let's have a look. Wow, it's very warm in here. So far, what we can see is the very first peak of a result, which is the clay rulers. This one looks beautiful, that lovely color. The other's interesting. It's hot even through my gloves. Okay, we have the real results. Ooh. Okay, so very interesting results so far. We're going to talk about them properly in a bit, but I just want to have a look at my initial reactions. Clay 2 has some bloating, which is really interesting. So on the inside, you can see that there's some like kind of pimples, I suppose, and on the outside as well. So that is indicating that it's fired too high. So perhaps it's more like a 1220 kind of temperature rather than 1262, I think I go to. A very similar thing has happened to clay number 4. On the inside, you can see the bloating, and on the outside as well. Really beautiful color though. I'm not that into this color. I think that this is like too warm and too gray at the same time. Not super into it, but it's good to try. Clay 3, I thought that this was the same clay as clay number 2, but it seems to have behaved very differently. Bit of a bloat in the middle, but nothing compared to clay number 2. And then lastly, clay number 1, very similar to clay number 3 actually. You can see the speckles, which I was wondering about. That's come through just slightly, and the glaze is looking nice on the inside. Interesting mixed bag. So far, I don't think I would use any of them. After all that, we also here have clay number 5, which was the sandy one, which is fully glazed and clear. I prefer that to the unglazed, but still not a super fan. And this is clay number 1, and weirdly, it's gone like a little bit pink where the clear glaze has been. Honestly, that's actually really beautiful. Wow! Listen to the glaze crackling. That indicates that some of these clays that I'm testing are not a great fit with the glazes that I use. It sounds really beautiful, but it does mean that I would need to workshop these a little bit more. Maybe fire to a different temperature or create some different glazes that shrink at kind of a different rate. That's why we test though, it's very interesting. I'm going to put these on the table and we're going to discuss them all together in a moment. These clays are so interesting, like the amount of pink that's coming through is just, it's like pretty mind-blowing. They're so different to what I'm used to. I'm really into that. Let's discuss the results. My very initial thoughts before we go to my questions that I asked at the start of this, I think I'm not going to use any of them. So all of that testing was essentially for nothing, but that's fine. That's the reason that we test, you know, rather than just jumping in on a project and hoping for the best. So let's answer my questions that I asked right at the start of this. Number 1, how do the clays feel to work with? All of them felt pretty much the same. They all felt pretty good. The last one, clay number 5, which was the more groggy clay, this had so much sand and stuff in it that it did hurt my hands to throw with. That's fine. I don't really like the look of this clay, so I probably won't use it again unless it's for a specific kind of sculptural piece, but I don't think that I would throw with it again. I am happy that I did a little hand building test with it. I think it's interesting and it's really structurally kind of sound. There's no cracks or anything in this, so yeah, it's good to have tried that, but I don't think that I would use it again, so that's fine. Question number 2 was, how does it look when it's fired? So again, for all of them, I've kind of already answered that question, but for all of them, they don't look super different. They don't look better, at least, than the clay that I work with currently. This is my current clay, and this I really like that it has a nice speckle to it. It's a little bit organic. It has a really nice interaction with this clear glaze. It's really kind of neutral on it. Some glazes are a little bit funny on it, but I obviously have worked with it for a long time, so I kind of know what the glazes do and how they behave and things like that. So definitely none of these are drawing me away from this clay. I kind of wanted something darker, so the clay number 4 again would be the one that I would kind of go for, but yeah. At the moment, this is still the winner, my current clay. Question number 3 is, how does it interact with my glazes? So this is a very interesting question. They're all really different to my current clay. And I think the most interesting thing is how all of the nude tests look, all of the clear, transparent tests, especially on these cups. They look fine. I think I'm most interested in how different the clear glaze makes the clay. I've never seen just a neutral clear glaze make something go a little bit more pink. So there must be something in the clay that's reacting with my glaze, which I think is incredibly interesting, especially when you look at the difference between like the neutrality of my clay that I currently use compared to like where the line where I've wiped this glaze off, it's significantly different, right, to just the glaze area. So yeah, I'm very interested in that, but I'm not convinced by it, I suppose. Some of these other glazes, they look fine. Like this honey glaze, my like yellow glaze on clay number 3 has gone really dark, which is weird, interesting. This glaze is heavy in iron oxide, red iron oxide, which does do this, but usually it has a reaction where it goes yellow on my normal clay. So yeah, interesting. Also on clay number 5, it's gone really dark, but that's, I suppose, not surprising. I think my favorite result of all of them is my chalk glaze, which is a pretty neutral kind of creamy colored white. It's a matte glaze. It looks awesome on this dark clay. I think the contrast between the dark clay and the light glaze is really beautiful compared to the other glazes. I think they all look pretty like flat and kind of uninteresting. The blue glaze, I think as well, it looks quite flat, even though it's a beautiful vibrant glaze on my other clay. Any flaws? That's the next question. Yeah, there's quite a few flaws. I'm really interested in the bloating that's happened with clay number 2 and clay number 4. It's indicating that it's been fired way too hot. Clay number 2, I don't like the color and I don't like the finish, so that's never going to be used again. In clay number 4, the dark clay, again, I just think it's quite interesting, and I actually really like the tumbler that came out. There are some small bloats in it, but I think that the reaction between the clay and the glaze again is quite interesting and quite pretty. No cracking, no warping, and no melting, which is great on all of them. It's just the bloating, which is an indication that they have gone too high for what they're capable of. And the last question is about shrinkage. Because these clays I may not end up using anyway, like the shrinkage doesn't matter, but we will look at them regardless. If I was going to use them for anything, then I would want to know exactly what the shrinkage is to kind of the exact percentage. My clay shrinks like 10.5%. Clay number 1 has shrunk 11%. Clay number 2, Studio All-Purpose Clay. That has shrunk a lot. That has shrunk 16%. Wow. Does make sense, I suppose, like it clearly struggled in the firing. Clay number 3, which is pretty much the same clay, but it has a little bit of grog in it. Studio All-Purpose with grog. That has shrunk a lot less. That's only shrunk 11%. So yeah, you can tell that the grog makes a big difference to that clay, and it clearly makes it a little bit more sturdy for stoneware settings. If you're firing lower, then maybe the all-purpose is fine. This one has shrunk a lot. Clay number 4, 15%. That's a lot. And again, not that surprising because of the bloating and things that we see. We can see that it's probably slightly too hot for it in the stoneware setting. Maybe I would fire it down at cone 6 next time rather than kind of somewhere between cone 8 and 9. And lastly, there's groggy clay, which is the hand building crank. That has shrunk 10%. So again, that's pretty good. You don't want to lose too much clay when you're throwing, so I would say that's fairly nice. I clearly have a favorite, which is number 4. I would love to know what your favorite is as well. Please let me know in the comments, because it's pretty interesting, like what people are drawn to and like what interests you. You know, I'd love to know. Guys, thank you so much for joining me on this journey. I've actually loved this process so much. It's something that I don't really do in my practice very often. I will test glazes and things, but I don't tend to test clays very often because I'm so kind of wedded to my current clay. I love you. I'm certainly going to do this again very soon. Probably I will go for like a white clay or maybe something really dark like a terracotta. It's been a really enjoyable journey and I've learnt loads, and you know, it's all good that we're not actually going to proceed with any of them because we've learnt so much. What a joy it's been. Thank you so much for joining me. I am on the socials. I'm on Instagram and TikTok at mae.ceramics. You can find me there during the week between these videos, posting slightly more chaotic maybe unhinged, maybe content, so you can follow me there. Otherwise, I will see you next week for another pottery video.